Hello, I'm Eugene.
And I'm Chris.
And we have today our special guest, Angela, in our podcast series, Deepening the Conversation. This is the final podcast in our Encourage to Look project. And we're very thrilled to have you, Angela, and wanted to let you introduce yourself and talk about what we've shared with you, what we've been doing with this Courage to Look project, and what the participants are engaging with into the materials, and would love to get your thoughts and eventually how to move this conversation forward.
Hi, I'm Angela. I am thrilled to be here today. One of the things that came out of my last conversation with you too, I've been chewing on what kind of relationship I want to have with my white friends. I work in the media, so some of my I'm able to interact with white people. That's not a problem. But the friends that I hold dear to my heart, I had started questioning how close I could be with them or stay close to them in light of the events of the last year. And part of that is what the events of last year illuminated was that people of color we walk a tightrope a lot of the times, but it's so unconscious because we've been so socialized to walk that tightrope. And when the protest happened, it finally gave voice for us to be out loud, to express all the things we repress when we're in the company of white people. So in my last conversation with you and Chris, I was chewing on how I'm going to relate to one of my closest white friends. And it brought up some uncomfortable feelings. It made me want to push back from her. Not that she had done anything wrong, but just the realization that I don't know what to do with these feelings of sorrow and anger and rage, and this feeling that this country just keeps pushing back on basic human rights and sharing the pie that we helped create. And so in the last conversation with you guys, I said, well, maybe it starts with me opening up a conversation with my friends. So the last time I talked with my close friend, we talk about once a month and we kind of catch up, and I began opening up about what I've been struggling with in terms of these feelings that I have toward white people as a whole. And it was refreshing to hear that she was worried about our relationship because she thought she was gonna lose me as a friend because of it. And I believe I told her that I knew we would never not be friends, but I wasn't sure how close I was gonna stay with her. And so I told her all the things that I mentioned in our last conversation in this forum. And I think the funniest thing she said, I said, I'm just like not liking white people right now. And she's like, no, because we're assholes. And it sort of helped me realize that I didn't have to convince her or have to go through a history lesson on what we've gone through in this country. And I told her it's a weird compartmentalization that we have to do. Like, I'm still friends with her, but I have to sort of forget the whole history of what her tribe has done. And I think what those protests, like I said, it illuminated that I'm tired of compartmentalizing. And that means I'm going to probably come a lot more aggressive in the Angela kind of way. I'm not going to go out and start a riot or anything, but it's just that I'm going to have to own up to my feelings and be ready to express them to her the way I would express them to my other people, friends of color. And so we decided we're going to, some of our conversations, we will share incidents from our childhood, share, because one of the things is, it's like, if I open myself up, is she going to be able to bear the pain that I'm going to give her? And because we have that relationship, I believe she can, and she's willing. And I'm going to learn aspects of her childhood because she grew up with a British mother, and she had a British accent in America. And she said that she was taunted as well. And she knows that it's not the same thing, but she has a point of reference where she's been othered. And so I think I'm going to gain a deeper understanding of her as well. And then I shared it with another white friend at work, that I was talking to my other white friend about this. And she said, I'm willing to talk to you about that too. And so we had a Slack exchange during work talking about race. And so I don't have an expectation of an outcome, but I'm going to have to step in these conversations and pick people who are able to handle it and are ready to expand as well.
Angela, I was wondering if you could talk about what qualities in your friends that you look for that prompt you to feel they could handle your pain, handle you talking about not only how to talk about your own personal experiences in the context of how African Americans were treated in this country.
Well, a lot of the friends I have are like me. They're compassionate, they're thinkers, they're curious, they have a variety of friends. They like to look for information from various sources, and they are open. And those are the qualities I try to cultivate myself, and I have attracted people like that in my life. And so when we've already shared other pains about our lives, whether it's childhood events or workplace events, so there's that trust that's already been built into our relationship. So this is just another area where we can open up about something that we've been uncomfortable to share before, but because we've already put enough cookies in the cookie jar, there's enough goodwill there that that I can draw upon that when I broach these topics. And I do think I'm going to give it a format or some kind of structure, so it's maybe 20 minutes or of our hour-long conversation or something, where it doesn't take up the conversation, but it does kind of start pushing the envelope a little bit.
Thank you. That was incredibly poignant and powerful. I can't help but recall when I started doing this work myself, this quote by Iyanla Van Zandt. It goes, until you heal the wounds of your past, you're going to bleed. You can bandage the bleeding with food, alcohol, drugs, work, cigarettes, sex, but eventually it will all ooze and stain through your life. You must find the strength to open the wounds, stick your hands inside, and pull out the core of the pain that is holding you in your past, the memories, and make peace with them. And that was sort of my motivating slogan for beginning this work. And and it is uncomfortable. It is painful. But I was listening to you talk about the last year, or maybe even last year and a half in American history, in world history as well. And when I was doing my mm, doctoral studies, when we gathered data, there was this notion in statistics of regression to the mean. That when a variety of data is plotted on a graph and change is noted, there's often this phenomenon of returning to the mean. And so it got me thinking in the last couple of days, is the mean, the statistical mean of our moral compass as a society getting broadened and deepened and and more elevated, or is that mean actually beginning to drop?
Hmm. I I don't I read stories every day about, I'm an editor for a newspaper, and so I only read about conflict. And what's brought me a lot of sorrow in this last year is that we've blown the top off in terms of exposing a lot of the ugly that we've been trying to cover as a country. Like we've had to blow that up again. And that the amount of force it took for us to expose these lies and these horrors, there's always a force almost as strong that is working to put the lid back on. And I'm not sure if that's just the part of the human experience, that there's always going to be this tug of war. And it really is a war because we're pouring resources and sowing misinformation and information and using media and other means to try to expand the message, and then also people who are trying to suppress the message or suppress the truth or suppress change, positive change that would the thing is, when people of color benefit from something, it helps everybody. But that's what racism does. It makes it seem as if there's only a zero-sum game. And so in terms of the statistical mean, maybe because we're in the trenches right now with it, it seems like we're regressing and that it's not being expanded. But this is only, we're not 10 years out from this yet. We're not 5 years out from this. And I do feel like on some level that the coalition of people who want to see change happen has broadened. And that's been heartening to see. And that because of how this country was created, founded, and the amount of violence and graft and that it took to continue for us to propel the things that we're propelling, it's going to just take more forces against it to move things forward. So if we do regress, we'll have more forces come to push it forward. So I'm sorrowful, but I'm keeping hope alive, to borrow a phrase from Jesse Jackson.
I think it was President Obama who I think when trying to put his presidency in context, or just speaking about social justice in general, that, for every 2 steps forward, there's usually a step backwards. And I think, the pushback that Angela was mentioning is, kind of the step back. Um, Although, like she also said, we're only 2 years out from this, or really a year, and it seems reasonable that the pace that things changed with last year would slow down. But and it's also worth noting that, during these times of progress, like, they come under great loss to people of color. Like, you have the civil rights movement where, leaders were assassinated, and, the police were, going to all means of violent, all type of violent techniques to try to enforce what they felt was the law. But, I think people are resilient, and I think there are, like Angela said, a number of people in the country or around the world that do have sense, that are working to rid themselves of, this kind of ignorance that leads to discrimination and bigotry. And I guess I'm an optimist, so I like to think eventually people will come around, although it does kind of make you question humanity, that it takes all this just for us all to treat people fairly. But
I was also reflecting that the Dr. King's oft used phrase that moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, also applies to our own our own personal consciousness. Because that same give and take, and that same regression to the mean, and that the same expanding of the mean within oneself, hopefully is also bending towards justice. Some of us recently were talking about the sort of, by looking at history, the sort of empowerment that gives you, the sort of Chris, help me out. The phrase that Takaki used, but it gives you sort of a certain conviction and a certain power, and yet in daily life, in engaged daily life, that isn't surrounded by daily calls for protest and justice and marching in the street and whatnot. We have these personal habituated tendencies, patterns that prevent us from stretching our own personal moral arc within our universe. What are some of those patterns that we'd like to remove, that we'd like to stretch? And our participants have traveled this journey for some 16 weeks now, and they'll need a gauge. We all need a gauge, when to speak, when not to speak, when to question the authority, and when not to question. And I keep mentioning to in our emails that change must come from the top down and from the bottom up. And so, yeah, maybe some final thoughts along that nature for our participants, Angela.
Well, I like what Eugene, when you talked about having to, what you were saying, have to look inward. Just think about all the things we've been told about ourselves in our own lifetimes, what our parents have told us who we are, what our families have told us, families, lovers, bosses, and how we've shaped our identity based on that, and then have had to push back on that. And if we can think about that, there were things that we were taught that no longer serve us because they have nothing to do with us, who we are as individuals. and they were just part of sometimes well-meaning people trying to protect us, sometimes not well-meaning people trying to manipulate us. And that we've had to, sounds like the group you're working with are very thoughtful, introspective people. And if they're able to think about how they've had to navigate all of those messages they've gotten, the false beliefs, the limiting beliefs, the critic, their inner critic. If they're able to face that some of the things that they've been taught are wrong, are destructive, are serving someone else, then they can expand that to think about society at large. What messages have they believed but have never questioned? And what your program is doing is helping them to question what they've been taught. And maybe because I'm a journalist, I'm always looking at the story behind the story. And why is someone saying this now? Is there a reason behind the reason for why we're learning about this now? And just having a skeptical curiosity about what you've been taught about various aspects of this country and why certain groups are seen a certain way. Who does that serve? If a certain group of people are always thought of in negative terms, or they're supposed to be feared or distrusted, there's a reason why that has prevailed for so long. And to look at who does that serve? Does that serve the people who are being maligned, or people who want to manipulate them to extract their resources, their dignity, their humanity, so that they don't ever have to fight? So I would encourage people, like you said, to continue looking within in their own lives. And then as they're healing their relationship with themselves, to then they have bandwidth to start thinking outside of themselves and looking at various aspects of society and look at what racism really is, and peeling back the layers of why there is something called racism.
I would hope that the participants that they'll take the experiences that they've had, investigating the material and also themselves and their own biases and experiences, and feel emboldened by their progress, and try to cultivate the ability to share what they've learned or utilize some of the techniques that other participants who have been part of these video casts to speak authentic, from a place of authenticity, but also having an interest to engage and hopefully remove this, this bias or this value from one of their friends or family. It's, I think, very vital work. I can only speak for myself that, over the years, I've encountered my biases and reevaluated myself and what I've been taught, kind of similar to what Angela mentioned about, the, frankly wrong ideas we get around groups of people that aren't accurate and true. That has really opened myself up to, the career world, and I feel my world is, that much more richer and of high value. So I hope that the participants continue to investigate and themselves and the material, and other material, and continue to just try to be the change in the world. To try to take their inner change and try to radiate or project it into their daily lives.
I'd like to add one more thing. I mentioned earlier talking about this compartmentalization that we do, and that's a human thing. We have to push some information aside so we can focus on what we're doing ahead. And what I would want your participants to realize that this muck that they're feeling in addressing this material is what people of color grapple with on the daily. It's not always in the foreground, but that muck is there. And that in their work with this material is on their way helping bear some of our pain too. And yes, they can walk away from it, but the fact that they're choosing to step into this this different worldview should be commended, and that they're sharing a bit of what we carry as we walk around this country. And that's a window that they might not have gotten unless you guys had started this project. So I want to commend everybody for having the courage to look into this and be humble about learning more about something that they weren't aware of before.
Again, that was very powerful, having the ability to carry some of that burden, even just for a little bit. But going into how to be an engaged voice, emboldened by a little bit of knowledge of history. I'm thinking of that maxim that goes around in various circles. Is it true? And I have my own version of it. Is it true? Is it kind? Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? To which I would add, and why not? Because in the forum of social justice, who's going to say it?
Well, I know for me, it helps when I'm around other like-minded people. I'm not, my personality, I'm not forceful or bold or blunt. But when I'm with other people in some kind of setting, I'm more emboldened. And so that's what I've been, I think, in grappling with these issues, I'm starting to pay attention to maybe I need to join a group of people who are working on justice issues, but in something that something that's akin to my personality. I won't be in the streets, but maybe I will be helping with discussion groups or reading a book so I think one of the things that you're asking is what's the next step? I think if you're willing to grapple with the emotions that come up, you always are prompted to do a next step. It's just whether you have the courage to do that and the faith that when you take that step is going to lead to something better. And, so I think that's what advice I would give to your participants, that if they're listening to themselves, they will be prompted to take a step toward, and it could be confronting someone or opening conversation or contributing to a group or whatever, but just take a step because that leads to the next step if you're staying open to the process.
I think in one of our previous podcasts, our participant Ellen mentioned something I think that's fitting here, that she was talking she does social justice work, and she found simply that just showing up was a big step. And I think, in these moments where our consciousness are peaked, I think it's just important just to be present and show up, and remember that you don't have to necessarily end racism in that one conversation, but you could just simply say, why do you think that? Or tell me more. Eugene has suggested using these simple techniques throughout these podcasts. So just start small, and um, in the end, just feel that your presence was known, and in the end, the other person will have to process that, but you will have known that you did make a step, and hopefully, that step is something you can take a measure of that you can feel like you acted courageously, and hopefully uh that's a motivation to continue.
Yeah, I wish that I wish we had better news for our ending notes, our musical coda, if you will, for our participants. But it is a life, it is a journey, and the work of a lifetime. So, but the courageousness to participate in the first place, and even just get toes wet in some uncomfortable muck material is a major force for change. And so maybe we could just go around the room and just have some final closing remarks about moving forward and engaging in life and engaging in the world, with the moral arc of the universe spreading towards justice in mind.
Actually, I don't have anything more to share. I feel like I've said that taking a step. I think that's just take a step.
Yeah, sometimes the large social movements start with very basic small acts of courage, and whether showing up in a conversation where someone says something that's reflecting a bias, or showing up in a volunteer organization, showing up as a volunteer to an organization that's working towards social justice or restorative justice. Those are meaningful steps. So start small, and hopefully, as you continue to grow and you're able to affect the people in your lives, that cascades and other people begin to do the same. And we may not necessarily get there in on the timeline that we want, but that doesn't mean we can't make progress nonetheless.
And I'm going to borrow something that Chris made reference to, which is just much more pithy, is be the change that you want. But you don't have to broadcast it, because when you've had that material, and this inward looking has affected your interior universe as well as your exterior universe, you don't need to broadcast it. You don't need to find disciples, because people will come to you and notice a change and say, how did you do that? Hey, tell me, how did you do that? And I think that is the most powerful change, the type of change that is that results from inspiration and not by force. So please don't forget to like and subscribe this channel. We may have ongoing discussions with what we will soon call past participants in the future, and other guests. But liking and subscribe to this channel to get notifications. And this has been a 16, 17 week journey of the courage to look and these podcasts about how to deepen the conversation. So once again, I'm Eugene. Thank you to our special guest, Angela, for joining us, and to my co-facilitator and inspiration, Chris. And please stay in touch.